Welcome, huge crowd.
It's early. Friday.
We have today some recent winners of Hrabowski Fund for Innovation grants, and Anne needs to leave a little early, so we're going to let her go first, and if you have questions for her, just go ahead and ask them, although for the rest of us, we'll have time at the end for questions. So take it away.
Thank you guys all for coming, and thank you for including me, and I'm sorry I have to leave early. I've got a hot discussion of, you know, Puritan child rearing coming up at 11, so. I received funding for my project that I called Replaying the Past, creating a digital game for the history classroom. And last semester, I taught a seminar for advanced history undergraduates and master's degree students where we explored the world of digital games, video games for history. We explored ones that had been created, and we looked at some of the theory behind it. And then, as you'll see, we also worked with design students to build our own game. The class was about 12 or 13 people, about 3 undergrads, 2 master's degree students in education, and then the rest were history master's students. So we collaborated with game design and programming students who were taking a capstone class with Mark Alano. It's a class that's cross-listed, dual-listed between visual arts and computer science. And those students, over the course of a semester, working in teams, they pitch and build a game. And we were a client for them. And we provided them with background information needed to make a game about the Pratt Street riots, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, that was when Massachusetts soldiers were traveling through Baltimore on April 19th, 1861, basically just as the Civil War began, and they were attacked by a mob of pro-Southern Baltimoreans, and a riot ensued. So in this game, which is called Bandit, you are a fox. It was fun to explain that to President Hrabowski in the spring. You're a fox, and you are running through 1861 Baltimore, and you are collecting documents and reading them. And actually, because there is supposed to be an educational component to this, there's a way that you can actually pause the game, read the document, and take notes on the document as you read it. The idea is that you're going to collect 6 documents, and these 6 documents sort of lay out what happened in the Pratt Street riots. I actually wish we were having this talk either later today or Monday, because at 11 o'clock today, my Civil War history students are actually going to play the game and test out the game, which is the kind of ultimate culmination of this whole process that the Hrabowski grant paid for. And it actually paid for, we had a sort of early prototype version of the game by the end of the semester. And then over the summer, the grant paid for a history graduate student to keep working on it, and an artist and a programmer to keep working on it to really refine the game and make it a little bit more playable. This was a huge, huge learning experience for me. I'm actually not a big gamer, unless it's like solitaire. But I learned a lot, and I found it really fascinating, and it allowed me to think about pedagogy and teaching and learning in ways that I just really hadn't before. So I just want to highlight a couple of the lessons that we took from this experience. The first one is that working with students from an entirely different discipline who are trying to satisfy their own course requirements can be really challenging. We wanted, I think in a perfect world, they would have been entirely dedicated to doing what we wanted, but of course they couldn't be, and they couldn't work on our schedule because they had their own schedule of milestones to hit. And it wasn't the entire capstone class, only half the class was working on our project, half the class was working on another project. So, and obviously we and I quickly realized that if there was ever going to be a tension between whose work was going to get done or whose milestone was going to get hit, they needed to hit the ones for Mark Alano for their major rather than satisfying us. I think the best example of this is that they pitched several different games to us, several different schemes for the game, and the historians were not crazy about the fox game. It was also originally a cat and then briefly a raccoon. It went through a lot of iterations, and we loved none of them really initially. We had really liked a game that was more of a detective theme. You were a detective coming and trying to figure out what happened in Baltimore, and that seemed like a much more natural fit. But the truth of the matter is that the team building the fox game made a better pitch and built a better sample game than the detective team. And so it was actually good. We had to adjust, and we had to say, okay, this is the game we have. How do we work within the parameters of this scheme to still have something come out that's usable and educational? We also had to really front load the historical research because the designers and programmers needed it. They needed a map of Baltimore in 1861 right away. They needed documents pretty early in the process. So then we started to see, okay, well, what could we do with all this information, this giant corpus of research that we'd built up? And that's where, at least for me, the course went in a direction that I really had not anticipated, and in a really great direction. Which is the first thing I did was I broke the students into teams, and I had them build their own board games. So 3 board games came out of the class. The games are actually still sitting in my office. And they really got into it. And so one game was about the Underground Railroad, and you're trying to escape Maryland to get to Pennsylvania, and the best feature of that was that once you actually moved into Pennsylvania, you still had to roll a certain number before you could be free, to sort of demonstrate. This mechanism was to show how difficult it was to achieve freedom. Another was about a Confederate raid on Washington, D.C. in 1864, and then the third one featured secessionists in Baltimore trying to avoid being sent to Fort McHenry. And again, for that, to get out of Fort McHenry, if you were a secessionist, you had to roll one number. If you were a unionist and you had gotten sent to Fort McHenry, you had more opportunities to get out. So again, trying to use these mechanisms to demonstrate a little bit what time we're like. And they, it was great. The students learned a lot. Historians don't usually work in groups. They all really wound up thinking a lot more about pedagogy and issues of learning than they would have just writing a paper. Then the next thing I did was I had the students work with a really simple program for building text-based games. It's called Twine. And it's used for interactive fiction games, kind of like choose your own adventure games. And so each student built their own game. And again, this gave them an opportunity to think about what they wanted users to take away from their experiences, how to get their messages across. And so and all of these are on, I have a WordPress site called Replaying the Past, wordpress.com. And so you can see the games the students built. You can play the Twine games. What I really came away from was this desire, this realization that I can work games into some of my other classes, whether it's having students build a board game, whether it's having students work with Twine. They were, again, historians are not always so comfortable working with programming, but they got the hang of it pretty quickly. And that this shift in perspective I thought was really valuable to the students, and they really liked working on things that weren't just a paper that I would be the only one who would read it. So I will stop now. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Thanks. Yeah.
I have a question in regards to getting external funding. How do you think having the fund that you got here at UMBC helped you to get the external funding?
I actually didn't have external funding for this. I just had the Hrabowski funding. I do think, though, that having gone through this experience, if I wanted to expand it and apply for external funding, the beauty of internal funding is that it allows you, and I think this can be sort of generalized, is that it allows you to build your proof of concept. Because you generally can't get external funding without having something to already show. It's a little bit of a catch-22. And so to have this sort of seed money, I think, is really important.
Will you incorporate playing the games in your classes, or is just the project of building the games sort of more important to learning about the history?
I'm incorporating the game. We're playing Bandit this morning, and it will be interesting to see how much my students can take away from it. that was sort of the idea, is like, let's see how it actually works. I have to say, I had my 13-year-old playing it last night, and it was a little frustrating and clunky, in which case I think almost the Twine games, which are very straightforward, you can play them in about 5 minutes, are maybe, they're text-based, are maybe ultimately more useful. It's the sort of unintended consequences that, I thought the flashy thing with the great graphics, but in the end, I think the simpler games work. So I'm definitely trying it in Civil War, and then, we'll kind of go from there.
So would you continue in future classes to just have play or develop new games?
I think both, actually, although it may depend class to class, that I wouldn't have like a 101 or even a 300 level necessarily develop the games, but I could see having students in an advanced seminar or graduate students develop the games, and again, working with Twine, which is really not that complicated. And some of my students really took off with it and really went kind of above and beyond, and figured out how to add music and images and make these games really sophisticated. I do have one student who, his Twine game, he works at the Irish Railroad Workers Museum, and I think they've put his game on their website. So, yeah.
And I have a question.
Sure.
How do you assess, did you set this up so that you could assess that participation in the game, assess the learning from the game that's different from a conventional approach to teaching history?
Not really. I think I was supposed to do that and didn't. I still have some funding.
Opportunity for another grant. Yeah, I do think there is that the way that you assess playing a game versus, I guess like the sage on the stage kind of model of history education. Another thing that we did come to realize in the course of our investigations in history gaming was that, there's a lot of talk of like, you could gamify an entire class. And the whole class is a game. Yeah, Amy just made skeptic face. I think that's exactly right, that these kinds of games work best when they're scaffolded with a more traditional kind of class around it. So that one great example for that is the history game that most people have heard of, which would be Oregon Trail, which is a great way to sort of cap off if you've had your students reading about it, or have it kick off a kind of unit on the Oregon Trail, but it doesn't fully replicate the Oregon Trail experience. Although it's better than you would think, actually. They did a ton of research building it, so like, even though it seems like everybody dies of dysentery, it's actually the proportion of people who die of dysentery is equal to the proportion of people who would have died of dysentery.
Okay, well, on that dysentery note, let's move on so we can keep moving here.
Yes.
So, thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Who would like to go?
No.
Oh, okay.
Steve.
Then I will, I brought handouts.
Thank you.
So I would just like to give you a little bit of context, the problem that we are facing, what we did, and the theoretical or literature basis for why we did it. Thank you. So I'm Stephen McAlpin. I'm the Assistant Director of Interdisciplinary Studies. And I see a couple of faculty who are on our Interdisciplinary Studies Committee. So the context is our program since 1969 has allowed undergraduates to individualize their degree plan with the approval of a faculty committee. They need 2 faculty mentors or at least 1 full-time faculty and a subject matter expert. They need to pitch an idea to our department, or sometimes they're referred to our department by faculty who don't know what to do with this particular out-of-the-box student. So in the past, for decades, it was this degree design that is so important that they're getting approved, whether it's astrobiology or neuroengineering or something else, was an extracurricular activity. And there was no, let's say, course incentive. There was no, theoretically speaking, zone of proximal development where students in groups could
could compare notes about their journey and how they designed this degree. The degree asks them to describe what the degree is, what do they mean by criminal justice, or what kind of neuroscience, and who are some role models or scholars in the field. They need to write that essay, and then a long-term goals. We're asking sophomores and juniors to tell us what their career path is, and internships they'd like to get or they've done, and a senior research project. Sophomores and juniors, alone, working with an advisor. You see the problem here. And often, I've been here 9 years, I can't believe it, I've been here 9 years, and I would say, okay, for next week, decide on your career, write your vision statement for your career, figure it out by next week. And they'd come back and, surprise, they come back and say, I haven't been able to figure it out yet. And it would drag out. And less motivated students who still may be appropriate for an individualized course of study, and this is really a red flag, right, with SB 740 and larger issues of how do we prove students are making progress. Certain students would more or less coast, and we couldn't get them to the finish line of, you've got to get this done. There is a finish line. You can't reverse engineer an individualized degree. By the end of your junior year, or by 90 credits overall, you've got to have a degree plan put in place. So we decided that we needed more support for our students. And so we proposed seed funding for an individualized degree design lab, which would be basically designed as a 1-credit course. The money paid for LLC, recent PhD recipient, Romy, everybody knows Romy Hubler, right? She's fantastic. To observe the class, to be an active researcher, even to share some of her trials of having a dissertation committee, and she was in an individualized interdisciplinary PhD program. She was a fabulous choice. So she worked with us over the course of 3 semesters to gather and analyze data. And to be brief, here's what we did. We created this degree design seminar and created a WordPress site. WordPress is so handy, inds335.wordpress.com, to enable us to, what Eric Brown calls, modularize our approach. So the students are split into small groups. It's really not worth it. We only have 50 minutes a week, right? These constraints of time. So we thought 2 or 3 students in, we call them a pod, and each staff member has a pod. I'm a pod father, and I have little podlings, and it's really great. And that's just enough to have 3 students. There's an accountability there. There's a bit of a performance of, did you get it done this week? What did you struggle with this week? And it's more of a support group session. So bring what you've got, and especially if you strive. And those struggles are helpful. You get the point. So we meet weekly. And we have about 14 different modules on our WordPress site. And I, as a podfather, decide after discussing the specific individualized needs of the group, more or less, I don't have to go in a linear fashion. In fact, this semester I went A, B, and then we got into this discussion of their career goals, and we dropped down to a later assignment. So I have the power to adjust the curriculum as we go. So over 3 semesters, we've been able to refine the model so there's both flexibility and an overall form and expectations. The deliverable being a draft of the entire degree plan by the end of the semester, which they can then submit to the ISC in the spring. So we want to take this a semester before. We created a rubric. My goodness, so students now get to be on the other side of the table. They take a rubric and they look at other students' degree proposals for clarity, for cohesiveness. Right? Does this thread of neuroscience or whatever run all the way through the document? So we created a rubric. We used the rubric in the ISC. And then something else came out of this of a theatrical and almost gamified nature. And it's so great to hear your work, because one piece of this is more or less a role-playing game where we ask students who've gotten their degree plans approved to serve on a mock ISC panel. And once a month, about 2 weeks before the actual ISC, the students pose as professors and they go through the document, and they are stunningly accurate in predicting the issues that the actual ISC will find. And so that's a bit of that's an early warning system. And the other thing is, I didn't tell you this, students don't actually defend their degree plans at the ISC meeting. So they never get to hear the feedback live, but they can go to the mock ISC, right? So if they've been avoiding their advisor's advice, I don't know why they would do that, or, you know, and no, it's fine. What I wrote, the first draft is great. They'll hear the feedback at the ISC from the group, and that motivates them to revise. So they have to turn that around quickly over the weekend and get final revisions in. The whole thing, the WordPress site, the group meetings, the mock ISC, has helped our overall approval rate. I can remember meetings where only 30% of degree plans, this is definitely not a rubber stamp, right? 30% of degree plans were actually approved. The data over the course of the study were that we had 28 students who took the 335 class, the degree design lab. 12 of those submitted their plans to the ISC. 8 of those were passed on the first round. 4 more were passed on the second round after being tabled and being asked to revise. But here's, I think, a service we can do to the UMBC community. The value of this, not just for our program, but for UMBC, is that it's an early warning system for students who they don't quite own their major or their path through the university. We had 11 of those 28 students who went through the gauntlet of 335 identified more appropriate majors. So I'd rather know sooner rather than later that students are not, that they're either coasting in interdisciplinary studies or they haven't, so the seminar makes them think, be able to express publicly, right, to their peers, to the mock ISC, the reasons for individualizing, and I think that's probably one of the most valuable pieces. If you have any questions.
Maybe we'll hold, just to stay on time, we'll hold questions till the end.
Okay.
Emily.
Sure. Hi, my name is Emily Stevens. I am an advisor in the College of Engineering and Information Technology. So I think our office was the first one to actually be staff that was awarded a grant as compared to faculty. So our focus is, a little different. Basically, our problem, our issue that we were trying to deal with is the fact that the students that we advise in COET, so it's all engineering students, computer, chemical, and mechanical, as well as computer science students before they pass their gateway, which are the classes they need to be fully accepted into the major. So it's all first semester transfer students, almost all freshmen, a number of sophomores, even some juniors. This population has been growing in recent years. Last year, COET actually had 300 more students than they'd had the year before, and this trend is not as great this year, but it is sort of going in that direction. And as advisors, one of our big jobs every semester is to clear students for registration. So I assume probably all of you know this, but every student on UMBC's campus needs to meet with an advisor in order to be eligible to register for the next semester. Our students were growing, we weren't getting any more advisors, and in fact, even the amount of time that the registrar's office gave for advisors to meet with students, the time between when the schedule posted and when students were eligible to register, had shrunk. So our old model just really wasn't working. Previously, an advisor had met with every student, often for 20 to 30 minutes to talk about things. It was a great model. I mean, students got really good advice, but it just wasn't sustainable because there just simply was not enough time for us to see every student within the amount of time we had. And allow them to register in a timely manner. Because obviously that's very important to students, that the first minute they are eligible to register, they want to be able to get in there and do it. And so we had started experimenting with some group advising models. We went into some classes, we tried going to computer labs. They improved things, but just either ended up not being as personalized as we liked, or we had trouble with the technology because it just wasn't really designed for what we were trying to do. So what we did is we, with the Hrabowski grant, requested to be able to purchase mini iPads. So the grant allowed us to purchase 11 mini iPads. We, in order to start trying some small group advising. So what we did is we kind of adapted the iPads just really simply to have some of, it's kind of hard to see, but our information here. So they were able to log on to my UMBC, they're able to access their 4-year plans, they can get to our website, all very easily. And what we did is we set up sign-up sheets for students. So it would be 10 students maximum with up to 3 advisors at a time. So it still was a pretty small group. Students were still able to get a lot of individualized attention, but that was still 3 times as many students as we would normally see within one period of time. And particularly when you figure out how often students didn't show up to their appointments, you know, this definitely gave us a lot more time to work with. Basically what we did is the students would come in, we would give them some information, we would give a real short presentation, that kind of the same spiel we give to every student. You know, these are important dates, these are our gateways, you know, here is our course repeat policy. You know, all these things are really important for our majors, but they're the same thing we tell to every single student. Then the students were able to use the iPads to pull up their own degree audit, which had the advantage not only of having them be able to see their degree audit, but able to find them. We were shocked the first time we did this when we would say, okay, log in and open up your degree audit, blank faces. Like, and how does one get to that? So actually having them use the iPads even meant that they were picking up this kind of very basic but really important skill. And then let's go for your degree audit. So we gave them all this handy little worksheet, and they would go in and just check off the, you know, the gen eds they'd taken, circle the ones they didn't have yet. And again, surprised by how many students, when they looked at their degree audit, was like, what do you mean, what arts and humanities? And we would actually explain, okay, this is that part of the degree audit, look and see how many classes. And so after the degree audit, we talk about gateways. Then students would pull up their 4-year plans on the iPads. Our program is really structured, so if you're taking these classes, you're probably going to be right here. Look at the next semester. Those are probably the classes you're going to need to take. Again, write them down on your handy worksheet. And then at the end, we would meet, one of the advisors would check in with each of the students and look over what they've done, you know, talk about their gateway usually real quick, and then you know, look at their classes for next semester and make sure they're not in a 100 level class and they're saying, oh, I'm going to take a 400 level class next semester. We could answer brief questions, and if students were lost, as they sometimes were, we could then refer them to sign up for, you know, an individual appointment and have one of those half-hour sessions. But the vast majority of students didn't need it. They really were able to get all the information they needed in that half an hour. So the way we assessed them was again, on the iPads, we had a survey, one of those little surveys, and it was really overwhelmingly positive. You know, the first semester we did it, we had both a mix of students who this was their first advising experience and students who had done it, you know, as an individual appointment in the past. Over 95% of students said, you know, they felt positive about the experience. They felt like they got the information they needed. 100% of students knew how to access their degree audit afterwards. And over 95% said they would consider group advising in the future. So that was, I mean, really more positive than we thought it was even going to be. We found that students actually really seemed to like coming with their friends. So often you would have 2 or 3 students sitting there and talking, oh, hey, yeah, I'm going to take multivariable next semester, and someone else says, oh, yeah, maybe I'll do that instead of taking differential equations. They would see each other answering each other's questions, and that was sort of a really positive side to it. It was very good for the advisors. Obviously, we were able to see more students. It also meant that we had time to do other things. So, for example, the last data withdrawal is always right in the middle of that time period. And it used to be where students were calling up saying, oh, can I withdraw from a class? And we're like, sure, we can talk about that at 7:30 in the morning. But now we can really schedule our time a little better and feel like we're still meeting the needs of our students. We did make a few changes after. You know, we made things like the 4-year plans a little easier to access. We did a few more things with handouts to make sure that they could actually walk out of the room, you know, with all the information they needed right there. The other thing we really looked at after our first time was, when do students actually come to these advising meetings? Because to have 1 student and 3 advisors, that works against us. So originally we scheduled some at like 9 in the morning and found, well, no one shows up to advising sessions at 9 in the morning. Really found that like 10 to 2 time, unsurprisingly, was the time that we had our best turnout, and particularly obviously free hours. So we always made sure that we could schedule, you know, those group sessions during that period of time, and then we would fill the rest in with individual advising sessions. So there might be one student that wants to be there at 9 a.m., but maybe not 10. So overall, it's been a really successful experience. We're continuing to look at different ways to improve it, but it's gone, you know, quite smoothly.
Okay.
Do you call them pods also?
No, I like that term.
You're not a pod
You
mother?
can borrow them.
Pod mother. So our project was called rather grandly, "The Future of Feedback, an audio-only response to student writing." And I'll show you first a couple of sample comments. We used iAnnotate, which is an app, an editing app that lets you provide various forms of feedback on work, but we were interested in the audio comments, which are 60 seconds or less, very easy to pop into a document using iAnnotate. The student does not need the app. The student only needs Adobe Reader, plain old Adobe Reader. So here is an example. Uh-oh. The sound was working before we turned the stuff off and restarted it. Huh?
It's really low.
I think it's the volume. Is it up? I think your volume on the wall is low.
I'll do tech support. Yeah, those are usually really, you can like crank them up. You should see like three.
We did tests before we started, and then.
Did sound check.
Sound check.
Yeah.
How about your?
All right. Well, the first comment that's playing right there was just kind of like a nice, supportive, the nice, friendly teacher voice comment instead of the hard to interpret teachers writing on the page tone. Let me see if I can get the other one to talk.
Although I think talking about Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail is really great for your paper, I'm not sure the way you set it up here works, because you're saying it is a for instance, in other words, an example of what you have in the first sentence, which is the idea that people are getting closer to an answer. So that means that if you do, for instance, then what you show us next needs to be an example of how people are getting closer to the answer. And that's not really what you do with the quotes from Dr. King. So just maybe think about how you're handling that.
That one is a good example of how if you've got sort of maybe tangled logic or something very complex in a paragraph that you want to talk about, talking through it is easier than trying to capture that in writing. And let me just do the other one real quick now that we have it.
Really interesting intro, and I like the way it really leads us to this final sentence, which is your big claim for the paper. Really, this paragraph is a great way to start, I think.
And that, again, that's how you can sort of be that nice. Students have told us that the audio comments are like having, one student said, like having the teacher standing behind your shoulder, but not in a creepy way. So I do have a few slides that I'm going to move through really quickly. What we did was we had 5 faculty doing all audio comments. We had 4 faculty doing traditional written comments as a kind of control group. And this was all in first year composition. We had faculty track how much time it took them, how much time they were spending doing both the traditional and the audio feedback. We surveyed students, we surveyed the faculty. This is what we found from the time spent thing. How many words of student text per minute faculty were able to respond to see how long both the traditional and the audio feedback was taking. And you can see in the 2 groups here that there's a lot of variability, because some teachers are fast and some teachers are slow and some are in the middle, regardless of whether they're doing audio or written. But the ranges are really quite similar, so no significant difference there. The students who we surveyed, we got back a really good response. Almost a quarter of the total enrollment of English 100. So it's a pretty good response back from students. And these are some of the things we found out from the students. We were really interested in how clear they thought the audio or written comments were. And here, the audio comments definitely beat the written comments, because for clarity, the audio students, 90% of them said that the comments were very or mostly clear versus 77% for written. So 90% versus 77%. And the other thing we were really interested in was how complete and detailed did they perceive the comments to be. And here again, we had 84% of the audio group said the comments were very or mostly or pretty complete and detailed versus 67% with the written group. So 84% versus 67%. And interestingly here over on this side, fully 1/3 of the written group said that the comments they were getting, the written comments, were either somewhat or not very complete and detailed. We asked how long does it take to read the comments or listen to the comments, and here the differences were not appreciable, which that's good news for those of us who are into the audio comments, because it means it's not a burden to ask students to listen to audio comments. It does not take longer. We asked how easy is it to remember comments later, and here the written group edged out the audio group, perhaps not surprisingly. We had 67% of the written students said they were very or mostly easy to remember versus only 54% here, and quite some significant concerns over here. 19% of the audio group was complaining either not very easy or very difficult. And a way of dealing with this is to use something like this. This is a worksheet where the students need to summarize each audio comment with a few words in writing. And this is kind of a nice extra step anyway, having them do a little more processing with the comments. And when they get to the end of the worksheet, there's a little bit larger space for them to summarize the final overall comment. So this is something that I'm using now. When we asked teachers, none of them thought the audio comments took longer. Most of them felt they were more detailed and complete. They all reported that students responded positively, and none had significant challenges with the technology, neither students nor teachers. And the faculty who participated, it does look like they're going to pretty much keep using this. And I think the most significant finding here is that 3 out of the 5 plan never to use all written feedback on any assignments ever again. So either they're going to use a mix or they're going to use the all audio approach. Keeping in mind that it's a really small project, you know, we only had this handful of people, but very interesting results. The final thought I'd leave you with about this is that Chris Anson, who's one of the pioneers with this kind of thing at NC State, he maintains that a 5-minute screencast of audio comments, he's using screencasts at this point for audio feedback, involves an average of 745 words, spoken words, in those 5 minutes, whereas an equivalent written feedback on an equivalent paper, only 109 words. So 109 written words versus 745 spoken words gives you an idea of how rich audio comments can be. So that is that. Ta-da! Okay, so questions for any of us about anything? Steph?
Yeah, I was wondering if you asked students about how they felt, sort of if the comments had anything to do with the tone, because I like how you started out with a friendly comment. I have used audio feedback in the past, not with this program though, which looks good. But one of the comments students said was, I always feel like when I'm reading your written feedback, like you're mad or I did something wrong, like they like project that like
Yes.
that bad voice.
Yes.
But with you can hear the way that they're talking, and it's more of like a conversation.
Right.
Did you get that kind of feedback? Or
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of other researchers who've been working on this stuff have found that too. What a lot of people say about it is that when you have written comments on a student paper, it's a kind of obstacle. It's something that the students have to get through. They have to interpret the tone before they can get to the meaning. Whereas audio comments, there's never any question about the tone, so they can get right to the meaning. So it kind of removes that layer. And I think that's one of the greatest, really the greatest things about it. And the fact, I mean, I have found too that when doing these comments, even though it doesn't really save time, but I don't really care so much about that, but I feel better when I'm doing them, because since I have to maintain my supportive tone, when you're speaking in that supportive tone, it makes you feel more supportive and more, you know, good. And so it is less fatiguing than when you have that stack of paper that you kind of end up getting bogged down, even though you're still trying to be supportive, that, you know, it's, so.
And I remember from Chris Anson's seminar, he said that because he said people's names at the beginning, the students felt like the professors knew them, and it was so great. And it was a very simple tweak, but like they felt connected then.
It's very personalized. Students feel that it's very conversational.
I guess I have a question for the whole panel. These were really useful presentations, and I'm really struck by how clear your goals were and your design, and then all of you did a really nice assessment of, you know, is this working? Was it that clear in your grant proposal, or, you know, so that's my first question. Was it as clear as it is now to you, or is this kind of after you've gone through this? And secondly, I mean, I could see that you asked for money for the iPods, but what else did you use the money for? You know, what was this for course design time, or so I'm kind of curious.
We use the money to buy iPads.
Okay.
Which are the property of the English department. They're not the individual property of the participants, but we have the use of them, which is kind of neat.
And that's what you do your editing on? Or?
Yes, because I annotate. There is a, whatever you call it, Android version, but it doesn't work very well.
Oh.
So it really only works well on an iPad tablet. And it doesn't work on a laptop. It's strictly an app for a tablet.
That's good.
So we had to have iPads.
So you had to have the iPad. Yeah, it wasn't like sure, they'd be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, ours was exclusively to purchase
for the
iPad, the tablets, and the covers, because we are giving them to students. That was it.
Okay.
How many were you able to get?
11 is what we ended up with, and we had, you know, the mini grant. It was because we were kind of lucky in that we ended up purchasing them right as the next one was coming out, so we got them at a discount, and then we buy 10. Basically, you got like the 11th one free, so things worked out for us. But now, you know, if you are able, you know, I just saw Kindle has like 6 for $250 or something, so there's clearly that price is going down, particularly I think if you're able to do iPad ones, which I think we could probably do in the future.
So the problem was clear to us. The solution emerged in the project, which was great. I think one of the most innovative things, we didn't have the mock ISC, the role-playing game, in mind when we began the project, but so the money went towards research stipend and teaching stipend, because I like this thread of bringing in someone like Romy who can not only help us research, but then who can teach or co-teach a section.
Okay, so it was for instruction time, and then, so you're saying that what you just explained to us was actually different from the grant you turned in, because you actually found out things as you were doing it.
The problem didn't change. We assessed what we thought to be an improvement in the quality of proposals. More were getting passed, but some of the new interventions came out of the really focusing on this problem of motivating students to write these proposals.
The seed grant proposal does require you to talk about assessment. And I think in ours, we talked in general terms about we'll survey students, we'll survey teachers, we'll track time spent. But we didn't have the specific questions we were going to ask or anything like that when we applied. That kind of did evolve.
Came out of it, yeah, because you have really nice feedback, yeah. All of you do.
I had a question in regards to SEQs. Did you see an increase of points in SEQs on your courses after this, or was it?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
We didn't really look at that, so I'm not sure. I think that would be hard to really depend on because so much goes into those key questions on the SCEQs, like in our course, besides just how the feedback comes to the students. So.
Also, yeah, we didn't base it on SCEQ assessment of the course itself.
It'd be interesting to look at that, like maybe over a long period of time, though. You'd have to get a pretty long term.
I would look at that because what I noticed actually, what I innovated and did something new in a particular class, and I happened to go back and look at my SCEQs, and I got lower ones. And I felt so positive about the class, and it was so great. We had this great project, and then I went and looked, and the scores were lower.
Yeah, that happened.
Lower. The trend, was there a trend?
The trend, yeah.
Wow.
And so I think I'm requiring more work in a way, and I wonder if it then reflected negatively for some of the students who weren't kind of totally sold on the project. I think didn't like it.
But how long were you able to track that? Like
this was just comparing, other semesters to that particular semester, and obviously it could be an outlier. But I did not at all expect that because I kept telling everybody what a great semester and a great class it had been, and my perception was different from theirs.
I know that one of the things they always say about course redesign, for example, is don't expect
the first
semester, the rollout to go up. It'll probably go down, but then later it'll go up. That's why I was wondering if you were able to watch later.
I'm hoping that will be the case.
It's a terrible measure, though, right? SEQ.
Yeah, obviously.
It's like the U.S. News and World Report. When it goes up,
you're really excited.
And then when it doesn't, you say, what? Right.
Well, thank you all for coming, and I'm sure that we're all happy to.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you guys for sharing.